From News Channel 8, this is News Talk with Bruce DePoint.
It is News Talk for a very busy Monday here in the nation's capital. So grateful to have you with us today. Thanks for being here. We begin with the global response to Friday's horrific attacks in the heart of Paris. Happening overnight in France and Belgium, a massive raid led by French police. Some 150 homes raided, with police uncovering what they call an arsenal of weapons. Straight to correspondent Marcy Gonzalez, who has the latest developments.
This morning, more than 100 raids in France and Belgium as authorities launch an international manhunt for this accused terrorist. Police say 26-year-old Salah Abdeslam led the team of gunmen who opened fire at people in restaurants and bars here in Paris Friday night. 129 people were killed in the attacks at 6 locations across the City of Lights. Of the 10 terrorists believed to be responsible, police say 3 survived, possibly escaping in this getaway car loaded with assault rifles. 2 of those suspects taken into custody yesterday in Belgium. But this morning, Abdeslam is still on the run. Police tracing the killer's connections to ISIS, saying the terror group's commanders in Syria planned and directed this violence.
There's a specific unit on the organization chart of ISIS for external attacks.
The French Air Force quickly responding, dropping more than 20 bombs on the de facto ISIS capital of Raqqa in northern Syria, as police continue looking for others with links to the attacks, including the alleged mastermind Abdelhamid Aboud. Today, thousands here in Paris and across Europe paused for a moment of silence, honoring the victims. And though France is still under a state of emergency, the Eiffel Tower, other tourist attractions and schools are opening today for the first time since the attacks. Marcy Gonzalez, ABC News, Paris.
Joining us now here on News Talk, Congresswoman ELEANOR Holmes Norton, a Democrat. She represents the District of Columbia on Capitol Hill. Welcome back.
Thank you, Bruce.
Good to have you here. Does what happened Friday in Paris change your sense of the threat that ISIS poses to civilized nations, to people who just want to live their lives in peace without having happened to them what happened in the horrific attack Friday?
It does, Bruce. Ever since 9/11 and Al-Qaeda, we have had a very special focus here in the nation's capital to spread the balance between keeping the capital open and keeping us safe. But Al-Qaeda had a modus operandi. They wanted big deals. These were not random shootings. This is very different. And so there is going to have to be a reconfiguring, particularly in the nation's capital, of how we go about protecting the nation's capital. Now, I expect all kinds of over-the-top recommendations for what we should do. And so my job is to make sure that this tourist capital is open for business, and at the same time that we protect district residents and the 20 million visitors who come to the nation's capital every single year.
Have you been in contact with Chief Kathy Lanier or with Mayor Muriel Bowser?
Not yet, and I don't think they are in a position to say what we should do. This is going to come from Homeland Security, from the Capitol, and remember, we have more police, more agencies guarding the Capitol than any other city in the United States. So people should go about their business, and although I'm telling them we are looking at this, those of us who have responsibility, in a very different way, you who live in this region should not. That's the last thing we need, is for us to cave into fear.
We have seen over the course of the last several months Syrian refugees fleeing in desperation, getting away from unsafe and volatile areas, desperate to find a nation, a town, anyone who will take them and provide them some of life's basics in a critical time. We're told that some ISIS terrorists mixed in with the refugees. How do we provide humanitarian relief? How do we follow our heart's desire to help the average citizen who is desperate to get away from violence and to a safer place, particularly parents trying to safeguard their children without opening ourselves to what we saw on Friday.
Bruce, this is a real test for the West and for the United States. We can hardly say to these refugees who are fleeing Syria in particular that I'm sorry there's no refuge for you anywhere in the West. There has been found a passport, we think it's a fake passport, near the Paris shootings. And there's no question that we have to assume that some of these people have made their way or are making their way in. So what does that say to the United States? Well, I can tell you this much about the United States. If you want to get in here from any country in the Mideast, it's going to take you at least a year and maybe longer. The president said we want to take 60,000. That's a very small number. It does seem to me we do have to do that. We can hardly be the leader of the free world and say, hey, but don't send us any of your, what does the Statue of Liberty say?
You're tired, you're poor, you're huddled masses yearning to breathe free.
You just can't say that. But it's going to be arduous. You're not going to see any Syrian refugees in the United States anytime soon. There was some intelligence from Iraq, of all places, that said that the U.S. was one of the countries named along with France. We don't know how reliable that intelligence is. We assume it to be the case. But you needn't look for any refugees soon. And as for the anti-immigration forces in the other party who don't even want Hispanics here, they should bow out.
There were a lot of questions directed by reporters at President Obama in his news conference at the G20 summit in Turkey along the lines of, have you underestimated ISIS? President pushing back very forcefully, saying he understands, he gets the intelligence, he's on it, he gets it. He goes to Walter Reed, he sees the American troops who've been forever maimed. He understands what the stakes are. We all remember 9/11, but there was this drumbeat, if you will, of questions aimed at the president regarding his fully appreciating the urgency of ISIS.
Boy, does he appreciate it. He really appreciates it. Look,
how do you react to those?
This is how I react. This is how I react. We just took back territory from ISIL. That's been overshadowed by what happened in France, because the president said we've contained them in that territory. Those were big wins. However, this is very different. This is attacks on the West. Don't think they haven't been seen as coming. But I ask you, Bruce, how does the President of the United States protect against that? One thing you will notice in the Republican debates that as much as they are critics of the president, and that's what the press is here for, that's what the Republicans are here for, nobody says put troops on the ground. That would be an inflammatory thing to do. Inflammatory because that lets off in the Mideast this notion of the Crusades. Here comes the West. This is what happened in Iraq. Here comes the West invading the Mideast again, as they did in the Middle Ages. It stirs up people who aren't now against us. As it is, everybody in the Mideast is against ISIL. Who we need on the ground, of course, are people who are most affected, those in the Mideast. We can only provide backup. This is going to be a slow slog. Everybody get ready for it. This is at least 10 years if you want to wipe out ISIL, and that's what we've got to do.
Does Secretary of State Clinton have vulnerability going forward in her campaign because of her vote? Does this put her vote for the war in a new and for her unhappy frame?
Well, it certainly gives ammunition to her critics, and they're using it. She has repudiated that vote, and I must say there are a lot of folks on my side of the aisle that voted right with her. And there were a lot of Democrats at the time who said, well, if they say we have to go in, we have to go in. I don't think that ultimately, given her very strong stance, her very strong defense stance, that will hurt her. You would notice in the debates on Saturday night, she leaves containment and says we must defeat ISIL. She has a very strong reputation for being first in, with what it takes to protect the American people. So yes, there's vulnerability there. She realizes it, and she's got to therefore show herself to in fact remedying how she looks at going to war. We inflamed the Middle East. We're paying the price for it now.
In terms of public support for whatever actions we might take going forward, my sense of history is that we would not have gotten into World War II had it not been for Pearl Harbor, because America was a very isolationist place, and we didn't perceive our national interest as being tied to events abroad. Does what happened in Paris Friday change what public support there might be for different options against ISIS?
On this side of the Atlantic, American people have always been reluctant to get involved in European and now Mideast wars. We got involved in World War II by one vote. It doesn't change boots on the ground. Let me hear who on the other side of the aisle wants boots on the ground or think that will do something. It may change slices of special ops on the ground, but you have got to train those people whose territory it is to take care of their own countries.
I want to ask you about two quick things that relate to other matters before we let you go. One is the emergence of a highway bill. Outgoing Speaker John Boehner said he was going to clear the barn. Now we're under new Speaker Paul Ryan, and I want to add that the second topic I want to touch on with you is it's your expectation for him as a new guy in a key and prominent and powerful post. But first things first, as someone who's been at the table in the discussions and the legislative negotiation about this long overdue highway bill, what can you tell us?
How John Boehner, I think, convinced Paul Ryan to take it is he did clear the bond. Some stuff still to be done. Will the government still be open? But, for example, the debt ceiling is taken care of for the next 2 years. Yes, the highway bill, and I'm one of the so-called big four. It's how the chairman characterizes us, very bipartisan bill. In this region, what is most important is that the federal government, the FDA, has taken over safety jurisdiction for WMATA. Very important when WMATA is losing riders. By the way, there was no safety oversight by any agencies until 4 years ago. So this FTA takeover is like what you're going to see throughout the country, and we certainly need it here, but we got a new highway bill.
With potential surprise inspections, we're told.
Oh, yeah, the whole ball of wax. And we've got now the first long-term highway bill in 10 years. Our infrastructure is falling apart. It is. Thank you, John Boehner, for opening the way for that to happen. It wasn't Paul Ryan. It was former Speaker Boehner.
What are you telling your constituents about Paul Ryan, about his temperament, and about what you can predict, to the extent the predictions are worth very much? What kind of speaker is he going to be?
Perfect temperament, very different Congress. He may ruin his reputation by becoming Speaker. That temperament may have to go out of the window. You notice he didn't have all of the so-called Freedom Caucus, the far-right caucus. But this is the man who got us the deal the last time with Patty Murray. So he does know how to work with Democrats. I know him. He voted for the Voting Rights Act. I can't assume that the reasonable Paul Ryan I knew on the District of Columbia can carry over to the most polarized conference that he now has in history. But I tell you this much, I'm going to see him to see whether that's the same Paul Ryan.
And we have about 30 seconds left. An event that you had scheduled for tomorrow is being rescheduled.
Thank you. Very important. Illness in the family. So Viet Dinh will not be at and we will not have tomorrow the HBO segment with Viet Dinh, the Republican under President Bush, who is going to give us a briefing on statehood.
That'll be postponed. It'll be rescheduled for another time.
To be determined.
We hope everything is okay in the Dinh family. Congresswoman Norton, always great having you here. So much to discuss. Thanks very much for your time, as always.
Thank you.
We'll see you again soon. We'll take a break. When we come back, security expert Dan Verton. Keep it here.